December 19, 1944, Belgian Ardennes, 3 kilometers southwest of Bastogne. 540 men lay in frozen positions along a tree line. Rifles leveled toward a snow-covered field. Across that field, 400 meters distant, a German column had stopped moving. Vehicles idled, troops dismounted. No one had fired yet. Major William Garrett stood behind an oak tree, binoculars raised. His breath came in short clouds. Around him, battalion staff waited for the order they knew was coming. Radio operators kept headsets pressed to their ears. Company commanders crouched with map cases open, pencils ready to mark fire coordinates. The German column had not dispersed. They remained clustered near their vehicles. Half-tracks, trucks, 2 light tanks. Exposed, stationary, well within range. Every rifle in the tree line was loaded. Machine gun crews had ammunition belts fed and ready. Mortar teams had rounds stacked beside their tubes. Charges set. Garrett lowered the binoculars. His jaw moved as if he were about to speak. He did not speak. The forest held its silence. 540 men remained motionless, fingers on triggers, waiting for a word that did not come. Second Battalion, 327th Glider Infantry Regiment, had been in position since dawn. They had withdrawn from forward positions the previous night under orders to establish a defensive line, covering the southern approach to Bastogne. German forces were advancing rapidly from multiple directions. American units were scattered, communications fragmentary, resupply uncertain. The battalion had dug shallow foxholes along the wood line. The ground was too frozen for proper entrenchments. Weapons were positioned to cover the open field and the road that crossed it. Visibility was excellent. Snow made movement conspicuous from long distance. At 20 hours, the German column appeared from the east, moving slowly along the road. Initial count approximately 250 soldiers, 12 vehicles including armor. The column's composition suggested rear-echelon supply or support elements, not assault troops. No reconnaissance screen preceded them. No flank security visible. Major Garrett had watched them approach through binoculars for 8 minutes before they stopped. The halt occurred without apparent cause. No obstacles blocked the road. No fire had been directed at them. The column simply ceased forward movement. German troops dismounted in clusters. Some gathered near vehicles. Others walked short distances into the field, stamping boots against cold. Breath visible in morning air. Officers stood in small groups, seemingly conferring. No defensive positions were established. No weapons were manned. The men appeared to be waiting, though for what was unclear. Standard engagement protocol was unambiguous. An exposed enemy column within effective range constituted a priority target. Surprise was total. Terrain advantage absolute. Battalion, level firepower against an unsuspecting formation of this size would produce devastating casualties within seconds. Garrett had commanded the battalion since October. He had ordered fire on German positions 23 times. He understood combined arms coordination. He knew the value of initiative. But he did not give the order to fire. Every officer and NCO in Second Battalion understood what the situation demanded. Training had been consistent and thorough. An enemy formation in the open, unaware of American presence, was the ideal circumstance, the scenario used in every tactical exercise, every map problem, every field demonstration. The manual was explicit: exploit enemy vulnerability immediately. Hesitation surrenders advantage. Once an enemy becomes aware of your position, surprise is lost permanently. Battalion fire doctrine was rehearsed until mechanical. Machine guns open first, targeting vehicles and concentrations. Riflemen engage individual targets on command. Mortars fire for suppression and denial of withdrawal routes. Coordination must be simultaneous to maximize shock effect and prevent organized response. Garrett had drilled these procedures repeatedly. Company commanders knew their sectors. Machine gun crews had interlocking fields of fire mapped. Mortar teams had registered coordinates for the road and adjacent terrain. The entire battalion could initiate effective fire within 5 seconds of the command. That command required only 2 words: open fire. Men waited to hear them. Tension was not fear, it was readiness compressed into stillness. Riflemen sighted on individual Germans. Machine gunners tracked vehicle clusters. Everyone expected the order because the order was inevitable. Garrett stood with radio handset in reach. His operations officer, Captain Dennison, stood 3 meters away, eyes on Garrett, waiting for the signal to relay fire commands to company level. The German column remained stationary. More troops dismounted. Some lit cigarettes. A few walked toward the tree line, not approaching but angling southwest, perhaps searching for a path or landmark. Seconds accumulated into minutes. The order did not come. Dennison glanced at Garrett twice, expression neutral but questioning. Garrett did not acknowledge him. His attention stayed fixed on the Germans, but his posture suggested observation rather than targeting. Analytical, not predatory. 3 minutes passed. Then 4. The battalion waited with absolute discipline. No one broke position. No one whispered questions. But confusion began to replace readiness. Garrett's right hand hung at his side. His left held the binoculars, lowered now. He watched the Germans without magnification. Captain Dennison took 1 step closer. He did not speak. Garrett's jaw tightened. He lifted the binoculars again, briefly, then lowered them. A German soldier in the field bent to adjust his boot. Another walked in a slow circle, hands in pockets. An officer pointed east, back the direction they had come, then shook his head. The hand holding the binoculars flexed once. Garrett turned his head slightly toward Dennison. His mouth opened. No sound emerged. He looked back at the field. Behind him, a machine gunner shifted weight. The movement was nearly imperceptible. A half-inch adjustment of posture. But it carried through the stillness like a signal. Garrett did not react. The moment stretched. Breath, cold, silence. No order was given. Minutes became difficult to count. Men in the tree line maintained firing positions, but the edge of readiness began to dull. Muscles held tension too long start to ache. Eyes focused on single points too long begin to water. Private Harkins, prone behind a log with his M1 aimed at a German NCO 200 meters distant, blinked rapidly to clear his vision. He did not lower the rifle. He did not look away from his target. But his breathing deepened, became less controlled. Sergeant Pulaski, responsible for 3rd Squad sector, glanced left toward his platoon leader. The lieutenant's eyes were on Major Garrett. Pulaski returned his attention forward. The Germans showed no indication they knew American forces were present. Their behavior remained casual, almost leisurely. Some sat on vehicle running boards. Others gathered in conversation. A few urinated at the field's edge. The tank's engines continued running, exhaust rising in gray plumes. At some point, 6 minutes, perhaps 7, a German officer raised his arm and gestured toward the west. Men began moving back toward vehicles. Not urgently. No scramble. No rush. They moved like a formation preparing to resume march, not one reacting to threat. Garrett watched this reorganization through binoculars. His expression revealed nothing. Dennison cleared his throat softly. "Sir." Garrett did not turn. He said one word, quietly. "Wait." The captain stepped back. No further question came. German troops climbed into half tracks. Engines revved. The column began to reconstitute its march formation, but the process was slow, disorganized. 2 trucks had difficulty restarting. Soldiers pushed one while the driver ground the ignition. The entire battalion remained locked in position, weapons trained on targets that were beginning to move. The window for effective surprise was closing. Within minutes, the column would be mobile again, harder to engage, capable of maneuver and response. Standard doctrine demanded immediate fire if engagement was intended. Delayed fire surrendered most advantages of ambush. Garrett remained silent. Garrett had noted 3 details within the first minute of observation. First, the column's composition was wrong. German assault formations in the Ardennes advance moved with purpose. Reconnaissance forward, infantry dispersed, armor leading or protected. This column traveled bunched, armor intermixed with soft vehicles, no visible security element. It resembled a supply convoy or administrative movement, not a combat unit. Second, their behavior after halting. Combat troops under operational pressure do not dismount casually in exposed terrain. They do not gather in clusters or relax discipline. These men acted like soldiers who believed they were in secure rear areas, which meant they likely did not know American forces had withdrawn to this position. Third, the direction they had come from. Garrett had received fragmentary reports through the night about German penetrations. The sectors to the east and northeast were compromised. But this column had approached from due east on a secondary road, not from the primary German axes of advance. Their route suggested they were not part of the main assault formations. Garrett considered the possibility they were lost. German logistics were strained, units were intermixed. Command and control was fragmented by rapid advance. A supply column or support element could easily become separated, relying on outdated maps or verbal orders. If they were lost, they were not an immediate threat. If they were not assault troops, destroying them would not affect the tactical situation significantly. They would be casualties, but not meaningful ones. But more than tactical calculation, Garrett weighed something less tangible: the nature of the engagement. 500 men firing on 200 who were unaware, unprepared, and possibly non-combatant support personnel would not be battle. It would be execution. He did not moralize this. He did not consider mercy in abstract terms. He thought only, this is not the target. This is not the fight that matters. The column began to move. Slowly, vehicles pulled back onto the road. Formation remained loose. No scouts deployed. They were continuing west, not turning toward Bastogne. Garrett made his decision final. He would let them pass. The German column resumed movement at 08:37 hours. It proceeded west along the road, disappearing gradually beyond a low ridge. Within 4 minutes, the last vehicle was out of sight. Garrett lowered his binoculars and turned to Dennison. Have companies maintain position. No movement until I give word. Dennison acknowledged and moved to the radio. Company commanders received the stand, fast order without comment. The battalion remained in place. Men in the tree line did not immediately relax. Tension released slowly, incrementally. Fingers eased away from triggers. Safeties were re-engaged. Shoulders lowered. Breathing normalized. No one spoke. No questions were asked. Relief was present but unvoiced. The silence that had been tactical became simply silence. Private Harkins finally looked away from his sight picture. He stared at the empty field where the German NCO had stood. Snow remained undisturbed except for boot prints and vehicle tracks. Nothing had changed, but everything felt different. Sergeant Pulaski checked his squad. Every man was accounted for, in position, weapons ready. He nodded to himself and settled back into his foxhole. At 0850 hours, Garrett ordered the battalion to resume defensive posture. Observation posts were established. Patrols were briefed for later deployment. The morning continued. No after-action report mentioned the German column. No fire mission was logged. No engagement occurred to document. By afternoon, German forces had intensified pressure on other sectors. Second Battalion repositioned twice before nightfall, responding to threats from different directions. The incident in the morning became one of many moments in a chaotic day, neither significant enough to record nor dramatic enough to remember clearly. Battalion records for December 19, 1944 list 2nd Battalion's positions and movements, but include no notation of enemy contact during morning hours. The daily operations log shows routine defensive activities. No ammunition expenditure was recorded between 0600 and 1200 hours. Major Garrett's personal notes, kept irregularly in a small notebook, contain no entry for that date. His official report, filed weeks later, summarized the battalion's role in the Bastogne defense without referencing the incident. Captain Dennison never wrote about it. In post-war correspondence with other veterans, he described the siege of Bastogne in general terms: cold, confusion, constant pressure, but did not mention the morning a German column passed within rifle range. None of the 540 men present that morning filed individual accounts. Most would not have understood the decision in tactical terms. They knew only that they had waited with loaded weapons, while an enemy force remained exposed. And then that force had departed. The absence of violence created no story worth telling. Historians analyzing the Bastogne siege focus on documented engagements: the German ultimatum on December 22, the aerial resupply on December 23, Patton's relief column on December 26. Skirmishes that produced no casualties and generated no reports do not appear in operational histories. The German column itself left no trace. Wehrmacht records from December 19 are fragmentary, lost or destroyed. If the unit filed a report of their movement, it has not survived. If they ever learned American forces had observed them, no documentation confirms it. What did not happen left no evidence. Garrett remained with the 327th through the end of the war. He was promoted to lieutenant colonel in March 1945, after Germany's surrender. He returned to civilian life, working in insurance in Ohio. He attended veteran reunions occasionally, but did not speak publicly about his service. In 1959, a researcher interviewing Bastogne veterans asked Garrett about decision-making under pressure. Garrett mentioned that restraint was sometimes harder than action. When asked to elaborate, he declined. The interview moved to other topics. Dennison stayed in the Army, retiring as a colonel in 1965. He taught military history at the Command and General Staff College for 3 years. In lectures on leadership, he sometimes noted that the hardest orders to give were the ones you chose not to give. He never provided specific examples. Of the battalion's enlisted men, few maintained contact after the war. Harkins returned to Michigan, worked in an auto plant, and died in 1978. Pulaski stayed in the service until 1960, then worked as a postal clerk in Pennsylvania. Neither left written accounts of their war experience. By the 1970s, most men who had been in that tree line on December 19, 1944, had scattered across the country or passed away. No reunion specifically commemorated 2nd Battalion's defense of that sector. The memories, if they persisted at all, remained private and unshared. The tree line itself no longer exists. Post-war development and agricultural changes reshaped the terrain. The road remains, but its route was straightened and paved. Nothing marks the location where 500 men waited with rifles aimed at an enemy they chose not to kill. An order that is never given cannot be analyzed for correctness. It produces no measurable outcome. It generates no casualties to count, no ground gained or lost, no tactical advantage that historians can quantify. It exists only in the space between preparation and action, where doctrine ended and judgment began. On December 19, 1944, a battalion waited in perfect position to destroy an enemy force. All conditions for engagement were met. All procedures authorized action. All weapons were ready. And then a single man chose stillness. The war continued. Bastogne was encircled, defended, and relieved. Thousands died in the Ardennes over the following weeks. The German column that passed unmolested that morning disappeared into the chaos of winter combat, its fate unknown, its survival unconfirmed. Years later, none of the men who were there could explain with certainty why nothing happened. They remembered the cold, the waiting, the tension, the quiet. Most remembered feeling confused when the Germans simply drove away. Some remembered relief. None called it mercy. None called it weakness. It was simply a moment when violence was prepared, but not delivered, when all mechanisms were ready, but the final word was withheld. The silence afterward was no different than the silence before, except that 200 men continued west, and 500 men remained in position. And somewhere in that empty space between them, a decision was made to let the war move on, without adding more dead to the snow.